So as I made mention during the Welcome and Away the last couple of weeks, did anything happen the last couple of weeks? In getting caught up to speed, there was some vague memory of an eclipse not too long ago. There was also Charlottesville, Barcelona, and Boston, a major hurricane, the pardoning of Joe Arpaio, scaling up of troops being sent to Afghanistan, the beginning of the implementation of a transgender ban among military personnel, brazen attempts at scapegoating vulnerable populations for all our ills, and so much more. So while I was away, I decided to take my children to Salem, Massachusetts on the way back from a little trip to New Hampshire. There we learned about Cotton Mather. Some of you may be familiar with that name if you either have taken United Church of Christ History and Polity or went to Yale. Cotton Mather, who led a life of scientific inquiry and a search for truth, who promoted inoculation to prevent against the spread of smallpox, one of the fathers of the Congregational Church, founder of that small school in New Haven, prolific author of more than 400 books, Harvard graduate, recipient of an honorary doctorate. Indeed, among the scientists who were for inoculating colonists against smallpox, and that was a great controversy at the time, the most prominent and outspoken among them was a Puritan clergyman named Cotton Mather. There are many reasons why we might discuss Cotton Mather in the here and now, including that he was the son of the greatest named Puritan of them all, Increase Mather. Oh, how I wish I had remembered Increase Mather before our son was born, Stacy. Life might have turned out very differently if he was called Increase. One reason to remember Cotton Mather, aside from being the son of Increase, is that he was the most articulate and among the most passionate advocates for the Salem witch trials. As I was in Salem last week with my children, I noted how unorthodox of a place it is. If you've been there, you'll have seen how there has been a serious attempt to monetize this history of the witch trials with storefronts selling wigs and cauldrons and Harry Potter scarves. Needless to say, the Witch Museum, though, was not the most comforting place for young children, although they were braver than I would have been when I was 7 or 9. In the dark basement of the Witch Museum is a wax figure of Cotton Mather, who we were told matter-of-factly how this Harvard-educated, inoculation advocate, scientific philosopher, father of Yale and Congregationalism, had sat on his horse and told the gathered masses at Gallows Hill that a man named the Reverend George Burroughs was the devil. George Burroughs, the former minister of the church in Salem Village, with a noose around his neck, according to the original account, later published in 1700, Burroughs made a speech for the clearing of his innocency with such solemn and serious expression as were to the admiration of all present. His prayer, which he concluded by repeating the Lord's Prayer, was so well worded and uttered with such composedness, as such fervency of spirit, as was very affecting and drew tears from many, so that, if seemed to some, that the spectators would hinder the execution. The accusers said the devil stood and dictated to Burroughs. As soon as he was hung, Mr. Cotton Mather, being mounted upon his horse, addressed himself to the people to declare that Burroughs was no ordained minister, and partly to possess the people of his guilt, saying that the devil had often been transformed into an angel of light. And this did somewhat appease the people, and the executions went on. In other words, Cotton Mather had already made up his mind about George Burroughs. And Burroughs and girls and women like Mary Eastie were going to be the scapegoats for the Puritan community in the 1690s. They were going to be the scapegoats. There was not a choice for them. Those events had been set in motion mostly by others. At the time, the Puritans were really struggling. They were struggling with food. They were struggling with how to relate to people of other faiths, how to relate to the Indians in the area, how to stamp their authority on every part of colonists' lives. The whole project hung in the balance. Fear was rife among the leaders of the Puritan movement. This is usually the way for most people, of course. Confirmation bias combined with the need for and the mechanism of scapegoating leads to otherwise intelligent people losing their focus, flailing and failing to address more deep-seated problems that are much harder to control and own. We see this everywhere. Most people do it. That thing, that person, that place upon whom we are willing to heap our scorn or our anger or our frustrations. It could be someone close to you, your spouse or your ex, your kid, your mom. It can be groups or whole continents worth of people. I'm just emerging from a couple of weeks of having one eye on Maggie Haberman's Twitter feed and one eye on taking a break. And yes, I admit at times I attempted to combine those two activities. How could I not? How could I not see Charlottesville? How could I ignore my parents texting me worried because I was in the Boston area last Saturday morning? I admit in these moments, not only was it difficult to turn my back on the news, but I simply didn't want to. So I took blocks of time, a few hours at Loon Mountain, New Hampshire, without a cell signal or Wi-Fi here. A couple of hours there laughing about the preposterousness of getting out the winter coats and gloves in order to go outside at the top of Mount Washington, which, to nobody's surprise, was covered with clouds. So maybe I've not got the latest or greatest take, but you didn't come here for the latest or greatest take, I assume. You could have just read Maggie Haberman's Twitter feed for the latest and greatest take. She's way better at the news than I am. But what I will simply suggest is that something has felt a little off to me. And I sense it's been off in my own community even as I haven't been gathered within my own community the last couple of weeks. Yes, it is true. Something is really off about a nod of the head and a tip of the hat and a dog whistle to white supremacists from the President of the United States. And yes, it's true that it is alarming that in the older days, someone would have had to work hard in their community to find like-minded people if they had taboo beliefs. And now the internet has solved that for white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and the alt-right. It is easy to find a community of like-minded folks. And it's true that this is an alarming combination of forces that are at work at the moment because they are attempting to gather under the label of free speech while insisting that all media is biased and can't be trusted. But something has felt off to me. Something has felt off to me about the apparent newness of this moment because it doesn't feel all that new, at least to me. One of my prejudices is when something is labeled as unique or new, original, I tend to scoff because there's no such thing as an original idea and very few things are all that unique. Every episode of every TV show is the greatest or the toughest or the most insane. You can't sell something without adding a superlative. So it doesn't feel new to me to have a political leader obviously be a racist. That's not a departure from normal. That is a reversion to type. And it doesn't feel new to me to have people lamenting the loss of their privilege. Talk radio people have made a career of that since I was a little kid. Now, I'm not saying there's been no progress, but we have seen the statistics regarding, for example, incarceration rates in America, right? We have noted that the majority of black men in this country who did not complete high school have been to prison. If you didn't know that statistic, I know the majority of black men in America who didn't finish high school have been to prison. And yes, I am glad for all of the people, religious and non-religious folks, who were in San Francisco yesterday and Boston last Saturday and Charlottesville the week before. I am glad for anyone who has held a sign or who has marched or who has made it plain that they are not on board with racism. I celebrate this march for civil rights and this exploration of what it is to try and stamp out racism in America. I celebrate the quest for truth and liberty for all. But I'm also deeply worried. I'm deeply concerned that many folks who look like me are shoveling all of their dirt onto the stoop of Richard Spencer and Donald Trump and the alt-right nonsense. I am deeply concerned that we either have come to believe or will continue to believe that that particular nonsense is located among small communities far from Montclair. I'm concerned that we can demand that statues in other communities come down, which of course they should, and not do our own work. I'm concerned that in order to proclaim the newness, the originality of the moment, the unique opportunity of the now, we miss the systemic issues that lay beneath this iceberg's tip. I am always concerned, that the need to shout ourselves hoarse now will replace the long arc of our own work in Montclair. The long arc that bends toward justice is itself a measure of resistance and protest. And no, that is not a call to be patient with racism. It is simply a reminder that, in my mind, we have been here before, starting with the text for today. He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but God in heaven." Catholics and Protestants, of course, have argued about this passage for centuries. Jesus asks, Peter answers correctly. Peter becomes the rock upon which the church shall be built. The apostolic succession meant that for Catholics, the Pope was and is the new Peter, whereas for Protestants, this has been an unsatisfactory interpretation of events, to say the least. So people argue about the nature of Peter without really paying attention to the confession about the Christ. You are the Messiah. A Messiah is an anointed one. There's plenty of debate about whether the Hebrew Bible contended that there should only ever be one. But the Messiah is one who is set apart. For the disciples, though, there is something about the place in which they find themselves. The Gospels are incredible. They are brilliant about transitions, locating people in particular places, and the places being designed to tell you something that informs the rest of the passage. And it says right there at the start of our passage that they are in Caesarea Philippi, a town that used to be a holy shrine for the Greeks who worshipped at shrines dedicated to their god Pan at the base of a mountain. Eventually, when the Romans took control, the city was renamed a couple of times, but was dedicated to Caesar Augustus in the year 14, so likely when Jesus was 18 years old. By the year 29, coins had been minted to celebrate that particular event. In other words, Jesus and the disciples are in a city originally dedicated to the worship of a Greek god, now dedicated to an emperor who is called the Son of God, whose empire cannot function without the four pillars of victory through conquest, patriarchy, slavery, and hierarchy. And Caesar Augustus has been named Son of God like all of the other Caesars. There is no Son of God in the Roman Empire except for the Caesars. And so then Jesus asks, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter says, "You," as in not Caesar Augustus, "you are the Son of the living God. You are the one who undercuts and undermines these four pillars of the empire." And this wasn't Peter's doing, Jesus tells him. This is something that came from within you. God gave you this gift, that you have had your eyes open and you have recognized that empire doesn't save, that Caesar isn't the Son of God, that victory through conquest, slavery, patriarchy, and hierarchy are not the pillars upon which a life worth living ought to be built. Blessed are you when you have been given this gift. Blessed are you. It is God choosing you that is salvific, that is the saving, that is the redeeming, that is the salve, the measure of grace, the cup of hope and salvation, and not the other way around. For you and for me, that may feel very paltry. If you have a tendency to contemplate your spiritual life for 60 minutes every week or two and spend hours and hours consuming the events of the day as if the two were entirely divorced from one another, that, of course, is the challenge for us people of faith. To look at Maggie Haberman's Twitter feed and also hear Jesus ask, "Who do you say that I am?" This is the challenge. To see the filth of the day being flung under the guise of a desire for free speech and for us to hear, "Who do you say that I am?" Perhaps we might even dare to ask a second question. If you say that Christ is the Son of the living God and Caesar is not, the one whose life undercut those four pillars at nearly every turn, where will you make this profession? If you need to and are called to go protest at the next alt-right gathering, go. But come home and make that claim in Montclair, New Jersey, too. Who do you say that I am, and where and when are you saying it? Lawn signs are not enough. Protests are not enough. There is a long arc here, and you and I have to both be in the race and stay in it for the long haul, for ourselves, for our families, for our neighbors. We are, in some ways, uniquely positioned to do this work, thanks to your talents and passions and knowledge. We are uniquely positioned to do some long arc work because of the desires and passions of your officers and leaders in the church, the talents of people like Lindsay, the position that I find myself in now as the president of the Montclair Clergy Association, which I hope will empower further partnerships for us in Montclair. I trust that Lindsay will continue to educate through the Lemonade curriculum. I trust that she and AJ will continue their fine work with our youth, that Betsy will with our children. I trust that we all will continue to ponder how, where, and when to engage, to live in that balance between being angered by the apportioning of blame among many different sides when someone, a particular someone, commits a terrorist act, and recognizing when scapegoating has begun to take over. Scapegoating for any person leads to bad decisions, unfaithful commentary and action, unfaithful discipleship, and gets in the way of seeking out a lasting hope. We must be, in our community, reminded again and again that the one who asked, "Who do you say that I am?" he too was a scapegoat. May you hear it again and again in your prayers and on your journey. As you pray, as you look at Twitter, as you march and protest, as you dine, as you breathe, as you walk, as you work. Who do you say that I am? May God's peace be with you all.